Okay.
Welcome. Thank you. So we are delighted to be with you this afternoon as we finish up this support staff conference. It's been a great day. I hope you've gone to some excellent sessions. I'm Patsy Egan. I work at Hamline University directing Atlas, and I also have a long history in working with really low level adult ESL students, those students often who don't read or write in their first languages. So I'm happy to be talking about this topic today in the context of a support staff role. And I'm joined by my colleague, Rebecca.
Yep. Hi, I'm Rebecca Jarvis. I'm the EL lead teacher and coordinator at Metro South in Bloomington. And I've had a lot of different teaching experience, but the majority has been with this demographic of learners. So it's a area close to my heart.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's been so interesting working on this with Rebecca, who's currently in a program, and I'm not anymore. So it's really helpful to hear the firsthand experiences. So as we move through the agenda, then we'll talk a little bit just to make sure we're all on the same page by what we mean by beginning ESL literacy. Who are we talking about? And then like what are some characteristics of those learners? And then we'll move into some task force findings because Atlas has had a couple of task forces to really get our heads around what the professional development needs are for teachers and those who work with this particular slice of ESL. And then we'll have some examples and discussion towards the end. So first, just thinking about what is beginning ESL literacy. This is an actual distinct level in the NRS. It's the lowest level of ESL, and its distinguishing characteristic, I think I want to be clear, is that these are learners who are new to alphabetic print literacy, which means that they don't read or write in their first languages, or they may read or write in that language, but it's not an alphabetic literacy. So we can talk about what some examples might be, but they generally don't read or write in any language or are just beginning to. So they have what we call emergent literacy. And they're doing the cognitive work of learning English at the same time as learning literacy, which is a skill most of us acquired early in life between ages 4 and 8, right? So this is a lot to ask of these learners, and there's a lot happening in their brains and also in their lives as they're resettling to this country. So first, let's look at how the NRS, which is the National Reporting System, of course, discusses this level. So here we've got ESL 1, which is what we're talking about, this beginning ESL literacy. If you're familiar with CASAS, then it's a 0 to 183 on the CASAS. And as far as grade level equivalent for literacy skills, again, their oral skills could be in a different place, but the literacy skill would place them at the kindergarten level. But something to point out is that CCRS level A, so is one of the levels of CCRS, and it encompasses 3 levels of ESL. So I just want to make the point that this is a vast level. There is a lot happening from beginning to end at this level of ESL. They are doing a lot of work as far as learning how to read, learning how to speak and listen in English, and then putting all of those pieces together. It's a lot happening, and that's why it often takes a long time for these learners. So let's think a little bit more about who they are. So if they are learners who are new to alphabetic print literacy, that means that for any number of reasons, through no fault of their own, they were not able to acquire literacy in their primary languages. One reason for that may be that their primary language isn't written down, right? So literacy is not something that is a characteristic of every spoken language. Or they may have had very interrupted schooling experiences. So they may not have had the opportunity to go to school. Civil unrest, war, they lived too far away from the local school was too expensive, like any number of reasons that a family may not be able to send their children, or not all of their children, to school to acquire literacy. So this is pretty common in a lot of our populations. So in Minnesota, for example, Hmong wasn't written down until the 1950s. Somali wasn't written down until the early 70s. So there are a lot of learners who may come to us who never had the opportunity to get to a place where they could acquire that particular literacy in their first languages. So we're going to think about, what do you see when you work with learners who seem to fit this category? What are these beginning characteristics characteristics of beginning ESL learners? And so what you'll do, if you haven't before, is go to a Menti, so menti.com, And then you'll type in this, thank you, Astrid, code 5773-9320. There's a little QR code too, if that works better. And we'll just give you a moment. We're curious, what do you see in your context as characteristics? So when someone comes in and they seem to be at the lowest level of ESL, how do you know that? What do you see? I'll invite Christine and Astrid to fill it out too, just so we make sure it's working okay.
Mhm.
Hesitation, thank you. Think, scared, what else? You can enter more than one word too.
Confused, definitely.
Oh, interesting. Unable to orient paper. Like not sure where am I supposed to put my name? Like what, which end is the top? Not used to pencils. Yeah. And yet I'm seeing enthusiastic, which I love. That's great.
Mhm.
And while we're probably not supposed to say this, this is absolutely my favorite level to teach. So like these are like learners that I really enjoy working with.
Yeah.
All right, there is another question. So let's go
Mhm.
ahead, since we're slowing down, and go to that next slide. So you should have one other question up here. Yeah, well, how are these learners different from others when you're doing intake? So say you're the front desk person or you're the person who's administering a test. What's different about these folks?
Take a lot more time, yeah.
Mhm. Need one-on-one assistance. Mhm.
Mhm.
Understand what I'm asking of them. Yeah.
Mhm.
Need some translation. Yep, all of that makes sense. Just give people a couple more seconds. Yeah, takes way more time. I'm seeing a couple times. Yep.
Mhm. Yep.
All right, thank you. Well, we'll navigate back to their slides. We already saw the results, so yay.
Yep.
So I'm actually going to have Rebecca talk a little bit about how many beginning ESL literacy learners there are in Minnesota and how's it going with level gains.
Yeah. So here are some statistics from 2023, which is the most recent year we have the statistics for. And you'll see that in Minnesota, we had a little over 1,000 total participants. That would be people who've reached 40 hours and have been able to be post-tested. And I was really surprised that they're outperforming a lot of different demographics and level gains. Because I always heard that the opposite was true, that it's so hard to get level gains on literacy level learners, which can be true, but the reality is they are achieving goals. Um, so I feel like that's so inspiring and really exciting to see that they are really achieving. And then some other statistics. I was trying to find statistics about like primary language, which isn't available, but here are some statistics about the demographics of different EFLs. And we'll see that in ESL level 1, female students are overrepresented at this level. If you compare it to some higher level ABE, that isn't necessarily always true. So this is something that we see in a lot of our levels, but particularly at the lowest levels, female students are really overrepresented. All right. So I facilitated, oh yeah, actually, Patsy, if you could give a little background on the
Yeah,
task force from 2024.
yeah, so here's where we came from. What we understood from talking to a lot of teachers is that this was a harder level to teach, and they were kind of out of ideas and needed some assistance. And so we did, and this was mostly focused on instruction. In spring of 2024, so coming up on a year and a half ago now, we gathered a bunch of teachers of this level. We put out a call for whoever wanted to join our group, met several times, and tried to get a sense of, okay, what is it that folks are struggling with? What is it that we could do as Atlas and professional developers and people who have some expertise in this area? Who could we bring in to help? Like what's needed to make this rather big, hard task a little bit easier for teachers? And so that was in spring of 2024. And there were a number of things that came out of that, including bringing, for example, the woman who does ABC English, the creator of that, Jen Christensen. You may have heard that name or seen that website. She was brought in to do a day-long workshop, and then we added certain things to the resource library, and we were able to do some subsequent projects and resources were developed. And one of the big things that emerged from that original task force in 2024 was there's some stuff going on with assessment. Like people are like it seems unfair. My students aren't making the level gains that they should. Their students aren't showing progress on the test as is. The new CASAS is problematic, right? So we were like, okay, well, let's dig in a little. And we didn't have time in that first task force. So Rebecca came on a year later and helped us with the next one.
Mhm.
What else would you add to that?
Yeah, so there was a task force in spring of 2025. I was the facilitator, and Patsy was also a part of that. And we had 12 different beginning literacy teachers from 9 ABE programs across Minnesota. And also we had the legendary Linda Keller joined us as a test administration expert. And one of the big driving factors was the loss of the Life and Work 2728, which if you've been around for a while, you're familiar with it. That was a really helpful tool with assessing the lowest level of learners. And after the task force, Patsy and I met with CASAS, and there aren't any plans to bring back the 2728. So the goal of this task force in spring was to identify some current practices in assessment, looking at some issues that students, teachers, and administrators are facing. What alternatives could we come up with, and other issues related to policy and accommodations. So here's an example of like what the problem is, in my opinion. The Life and Work 2728, if you were given this as someone who does not read Karen, you can kind of work out what it's asking you. This level, the 2728, was still able to assess some print literacy skills like letter recognition. Now that we no longer have that, we only have the CASA steps level A as the lowest example. This is the lowest it gets. It's picture-based vocabulary and words. So if you are someone who doesn't speak the language at all, this feels pretty impossible. So in the task force, the findings were generally around these 3 topics. We were looking at the intake process, like how can we make it more student-centered? There's a concern that we might be scaring people away with our current practices of doing registration and intake As we get more um, technologically advanced, like switching from paper tests to e-tests and using online registration forms instead of paper forms, um, are we creating barriers? Also, with ongoing testing, e-tests are obviously a concern, but also with paper tests, a lot of teachers were reporting that they were seeing bubble sheets given for the steps level A, in a hope to, save paper and save money. But there are some issues with using a bubble sheet at this level. And then also, people were saying, like, after my students take the test, I don't really know how they did, and I don't have access to that information. And actually, a lot of programs would have access to that information via TOPS Pro, um, if they do e-testing. So we were looking at some different opportunities to do some more PD around um, gathering test data. And then we were also looking at usage and documentation of non-NRS assessments. Like Patsy mentioned the ABC English earlier. They have a phonics test called the ABLE test, which is not a NRS approved test, but could we track this in SID and use it more meaningfully? So we put together a best practices for intake document. And let's take a quick look at it. So we don't have a ton of time, but let me see. There we go. On the Atlas website, you can find it here. It's the best practices for intake with beginning ESL learners. Here is the document. Let me make this bigger for you. So we'll look over all of it quickly and focus on a few different areas. Um, First one is use a human-centered trauma-informed approach. Um, Patsy, how could we explain
Yeah.
that?
So what I mean, it was overwhelmingly what people were saying was like you just have to be like compassionate and human and take your time and slow down and like all the things that you all mentioned when we did the Menti came out and we decided what's that category, like what are we saying? I think. And then as we were doing more and more trauma informed instruction, which is now kind of moving into like what we call healing centered approaches to instruction, that all fit under that umbrella really nicely of like, okay, we're trying to make this a welcoming space where they feel like they belong. And how hard is that when they're walking into a school that they've never been to, talking to people in a language they don't? I mean, it's scary regardless, right? And then add to the fact that they can't, maybe maneuver around some of the print around the building and they can't understand what you're asking of them. So how do we make that experience a little less daunting? And that seemed to fit under like, all right, we just have to be really human here. Like, how do we do that? And so this is kind of what emerged is actually our primary. I mean, it's first for a reason on this best practices document. And I think it actually Minnesota adult educators are really good at this. So we just wanted to lift that up as something that, we just know is important. Not that we recognize any like issues here necessarily, just something to be really aware of and maybe knowing that if you're taking longer, that's something to actually feel good about, right? If it's like, oh, wait, this is taking too long, it's like, no, it's probably not. Like, that's what's required in order for these students to feel at home in our programs.
Yeah. And the second one is using screening tools. So CASAS created a pretty lengthy intake screening tool, like multiple tools, which we will look at a little bit more. So often, a lot of programs at intake will do like a writing screener or like a speaking screener, and you don't need to reinvent something yourself. There is already something available that you can use and track. Um, One of the biggest questions that came out was if a student is unable to do the steps level A test, do we need to force them to do it? And the answer is no. MDE, we talked to Brad Haskamp, and the official answer is no. If the student is not able to do the test, you can just enter a 160.
Just going to
I
pause there and make sure everyone's listening because that's really
Yes,
important. So,
yes,
like,
you
say it
can
one more
just
time,
enter a
Rebecca.
160. If they're not able to do it, that's fine.
You can
Um,
stop. Right.
I
Yeah.
encourage you to try if it's possible. Like I can share an anecdotal story of I had a student come in who was definitely a low-level beginning literacy student, and I was testing him individually. And his sister brought him in, and she spoke English pretty well. And she said, "Oh, no, 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 he doesn't speak any English." And I'm like, "Well, let's give it a try." Um, and he actually got a valid score. He did know a little bit of English, and he had some decoding skills. And, at the end of it, he was impressed. I was impressed. His sister was impressed. Everyone left feeling great because he actually did much better than anyone anticipated. So I recommend you give it a shot. And we can talk a little bit more about details with the test later on.
And if you've had a similar experience, feel free to drop in the chat. We'd love to see what, while Rebecca's going through some of these other things, to see what you think. I totally agree. Give it a go.
Mhm.
Yeah, they say, "Oh, I don't speak English," and then you're like, "Actually, you know quite a bit." So,
Right, yeah, sometimes they do actually know some English. Um, so the next part is support during testing, and this is challenging. I will admit, as somebody who is also a part of the registration team, for some programs that have a larger registration appointments where they have maybe one or two people uh, doing registration for multiple people, this is tough. Um, but if it's possible, they do need more assistance, and planning and preparing for that can make the difference. If you're doing testing, um, check with your administrator. Do we actually need to use the bubble sheets? My argument to my administrators have always been that if we don't use the bubble sheet, we might get a level gain. If we do use the bubble sheet, we're probably not going to get a level gain. So sometimes you need to just eat the cost. Um, Partner with instructors for placement, some ideas around uh, more of a community mindset of placement and orientation. Um, a lot of programs do have wonderful registration and orientation documents already. Um, and that's a wonderful help if you have things that are translated, include visuals, like especially for the oh my goodness, I'm blanking on it. The barriers, like if you're a displaced homemaker and all those things in SID, like who actually knows what a displaced homemaker is? Probably not many people.
the
Um,
extra notes, but yeah,
right.
she's
It's
there.
Yeah, barriers to employment. Thank you. Um, yeah, for some of those things, it's very helpful to have visuals and translation and a little more support, because even if you're a native English speaker, you may not actually know. And the last one is advocate for the learner. If the score doesn't reflect the learner's true ability, flag it and follow up. Yeah, anything else, Patsy?
No, I think it's a good list, and I'd love for people to just really take your time with this document. And if you need to like advocate for yourself or your program to a manager or community ed director, like this might be a good thing to have and say, well, the people at Atlas, in consultation with the task force, and our colleagues at MDE came up with these best practices. Here's what I need, right? And so it could be a useful tool to advocate for more of those print tests, for example. And if you want to say, I can't make the student do a bubble sheet, here's your evidence as to why, in general, that's probably not a good call with this particular population.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. So we mentioned the CASAS intake screening tool. There is a lengthy document available, which I believe it will be linked in here, with lots of different examples. It is a 23-page document, and I just want to highlight the very end of it, Appendix D, the reading screening. Now, this looks kind of similar to the 2728. So they have a version of this that we can use to see, like, do they have any sort of alphabetic print literacy? Are they able to do this level of matching? So this is a tool that is available, and it's a few different questions, very similar to the old Life and Work 2728. So there's a reading screening tool, there's an oral screening, there's a writing screening, and there are recommendations for how you use them. So this is available to everyone. If this is a good solution for a problem you have, please go ahead. Okay, so a little bit about STEPS level A. The test is 33 questions, and the first 24 questions are picture-based vocabulary. After that, it gets to more complex reading comprehension. So when I'm doing one-on-one testing for our literacy students, I often don't do the whole test. Often we'll just go through the first 24, and then once we get to the more difficult ones, we're like, maybe we're done. And I also mention this because if you do e-tests, something that we found here at Metro South is that the e-test locator will automatically move students up once they get 18 correct. And that isn't even all of the picture-based vocabulary. So we're finding that students take the first test, they do all right, and then the e-test locator is moving them up to a level B test, and then they're crashing out. So this creates a very frustrating thing for the office staff, for the teacher, for the student, because we get an invalid low score, and then we need to give them another test. So one of the ways that we've been working through that here at Metro South is we force a level A up until they're like in the 190s of a scale score. And that seems to be helping quite a bit, just to avoid a little frustration. All right. Next, we're going to look at a couple scenarios involving low literacy learners. And what could you do in this situation?
Okay, so if you have clicked away, come back because we need you. This kind of work is complicated. We need the whole team, so we could use your insights on what best to do. So what's our first scenario, Rebecca?
All right. Your program has walk-in registrations. Someone with no English comes in to register unaccompanied. Has this happened to anyone? It's happened to me.
So they wander in all by themselves and okay, Sean says get a translator. Do you mean a person or like on your phone? Feel free to unmute. All right, Christine, what happened in your program? Oh, a lot of Google Translate's option. Good. Yeah,
Well, I
Christine,
can say that what
Mhm.
happened, my classroom in particular, is someone from the office might come into my classroom and ask, "Does anyone speak this language?" And off one of my students would go to help.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great idea. So make use of the people you got around you, right? And they might be students, they might be fellow staff members.
Mhm.
And I think
Absolutely.
Google Translate on your phone is, it's not ideal, but gosh, it'll work. It'll work in a pinch, right?
Yep. Oh, and yeah, Kim mentioned our program uses Language Line.
Oh,
That's
tell us what that
a
is.
great thing to find out. A lot of school districts will have a contract for some sort of phone-based language service. And my program in Bloomington has one, and I use it all the time.
So
And
it's kind of like the nurse line, but for languages.
exactly.
Okay, I love it.
Yep. Yep, and it's so quick. It's so easy. And a lot of school districts will have something already. So if you're not aware, yeah, see if you can
Yeah,
find
for
something.
sure. And then Pamela also said, see if I can get the ESL teacher. Maybe the ESL teacher speaks multiple languages or just like is has more practice at that working with students with limited language. So yeah, whatever human or other resources you have at your disposal, that's a good idea because we don't want that person to leave without getting what they're looking for, right? So I love
Mhm,
the variety of ideas here. Good.
mhm.
All right,
Yep.
what's our next scenario?
All right. So during intake, a student with low literacy becomes flustered and upset, looks to be giving up or ready to leave. And I think this could apply to really any level. Um, you're doing it registration for a student, and it's causing a lot of emotions.
Yeah. So does this resonate? Has anyone had this happen perhaps?
Mhm.
Feel free to raise your hand or unmute. We're not a large group, so if you want to come on camera and speak, you're welcome to do that too. Someone's having a little moment right there as you're trying to intake. What do you do? Okay, Pam says we tell them no stress, just let the teacher know where you're at. So trying to like again that very human, like, oh, it's okay. What else? Get them a
Yep.
glass of water, Sean. Sure. Just make them feel comfortable. Again, that's a very human thing to do. Would you like a snack? Like
Mm,
I find, coffee and a snack make friends out of pretty much anybody, right?
yep.
Take it one step at a time, says Kristen, instead of trying to overwhelm them. Yeah, that's a really good. You embodying that best practices document right there, right? So like what do we need? We need to like build that relationship, have them like start like some emerging trust that this is going to be a place where they can feel safe enough to learn and that they are in good hands. Yeah, I think the key here is just like warmth, right?
Mm,
And then Amy, you end the test.
yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, that's totally fine to do.
Mhm. Anything else? What else do people do in that situation?
Mhm.
Yeah, help them understand that this is actually helping us to do the best job we can to make sure they're in the right spot. Yeah, it's a good idea. Particularly if there's someone with them who can help you get that message across, right? What do you do, Rebecca, if this happens?
Um, I we stop what we're doing
Mhm.
and yeah, just try to say it's okay.
Mhm.
Um, if it's a low literacy person, then we stop the test and hey, I know what level they're in.
Yeah,
I We have achieved our goal.
yeah. Then the goal was for them to tell us what, like, where do we start with you, and to just start that welcoming process, right? And Christine put it so nicely here. The beauty of adulthood is that we can make
Mhm.
any choice we need to in the moment to serve the learner. That is a
That's right.
lovely thing to say. Yes, we're in human service here, right? Not testing.
Right.
Oh, good ideas.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah, so I think what we'd like to do as we come to a close for a whole day of good learning here is everyone to like find your fingers and find your keyboard and find your chat box, your chat window, whatever you want to call it. And I'd love to hear from everyone. There's 21 of you here, so let's see if we can do it. What was learned or affirmed for you today? Or what's something you're still thinking about? So
Mhm.
answer one or both of those questions. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Meet them where they're at. That applies for really any level, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of these best practices I'd say are not unique to this level, but they are
Mhm.
perhaps even more important at this level when they don't have other ways of knowing what's going on with this whole process. Yeah, Pam, isn't that a nice thing to know that? And that was actually like something that emerged because of this task force and because Rebecca asked the question and because, yeah, we were able to get the right people to answer and because the MDE team, Brad and Astrid and their colleagues are such compassionate people. Like they're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Let's do this, right? So just making sure that everyone knows you have permission to end the test. If you're confident that they cannot go any further and are not going to show any other progress, we're not going to torture people here.
Yep.
Okay, Amy, let's see. I didn't know there were sample tests. Oh, okay. Do you want to speak to that at all, Rebecca?
Yeah, the screening tool is also really comprehensive. I think it's a great thing to know about if you want to do a little more at intake. Like sometimes there've been some initiatives around like getting a writing sample or a speaking, like some sort of speaking tool. It already exists. You don't need to make one.
Yeah. Isn't that lovely? Like I
It's
actually wasn't familiar with it until Rebecca showed me. I'm like, oh,
yeah.
this is here.
It
Yeah.
it is yeah, it is an official document that
Mhm.
already exists.
Right. And the good people at Casas whom we met with, they were so generous with their time and we expressed
Mhm.
all of the same concerns that I'm sure you have expressed around this level as well. They said, yeah, all of that makes sense. Do you know about the screening tool? And we took another look and we're really glad that they pointed that out. All right, a couple more things in the chat here. Find a way to ask what we can do to help them understand and what next steps will be. Joshua says, try to help them understand the stakes are low and there's no failing. Yeah, that's a great thing to say. And I think we do that with our body language, right? With your smile and with, the pat on the hand or the coffee or whatever it is that makes sense for your situation you're in. And then two says, respect who they are. Yeah, I think one thing I just want to, I, no doubt many of you are aware, but like, it's not their fault that they don't read or write very well or they don't speak English very well, right? This is just
Right,
where they're at right now. And it's
right,
it's not the end, it's where they're starting. And we begin where the student is, right? That's the beauty of adulthood is we get to individualize to a large extent, unlike other settings. So we get to like say, okay, here's what you need. Well, let's start there. That's a great
yeah,
place to start. Yeah. All right, thank you. I see we have some very healing centered intake folks here. Well,
yeah.
just to wrap up then, we have a few resources
Mhm.
to share. I'll maybe talk about this first one and then, yeah, whatever you want to add, Rebecca. So the ESL resource library is on our website, on the Atlas website. It's fairly extensive. There's a lot going on in there. There is a specific area just for beginning ESL literacy that Katrina Benson and Rebecca, others have contributed to. There's really great stuff and it's growing. So there's more going into that. We have a curator working on it yet this year. And while it is focused on instruction, I know many of you wear many hats, so I just want you to be aware that that is available. And then the ABC English, I don't know, have you used that, Rebecca?
Yes.
Oh,
Yep.
same one. Yeah.
We're big ABC English fans over here in
Mhm.
Bloomington.
Well, so can you say anything about the ABLE assessment?
I don't have a lot of experience with administering it myself,
Yeah.
but it is a very basic phonics-based assessment that is it's leveled, it's pretty self-explanatory, and it can give a pretty good picture of where students are at with decoding and print literacy skills.
Yeah, and I happen to know that we will have a session about the use of ABC English at the Language and Literacy Conference coming up at the end of January. And that's another virtual conference that you and I hope you will pass this along to anyone else who's working at this level in your program. It'll be good stuff there. And then the Pathways to Literacy is from our colleagues in Indianapolis, the other Appalachia. Folks there are just doing tremendous work and they are not bound to the NRS levels and tests because they're not funded by federal. Anyway, they're not funded like Minnesota ABE, but this particular agency has private funding. They got a big goal grant and they were able to develop amazing stuff. So if you haven't taken a look at the Pathways to Literacy, and maybe I'll drop that in the chat, or Astrid, if you're able to, that would be handy. Maybe just all three of those could just go in the chat. And the Pathways to Literacy, they have assessment, they've got stories, they've got a whole curriculum, they've got the assessment is actually on like Google Slides, and you can show them, like there's some really nice materials there that you're not going to be able to use for like official SID reporting, but that could be very helpful for helping to find, thanks Astrid, to find where students are and to find materials that help them move along that trajectory. So
non-NRS assessments can be tracked in SID.
That's a good point.
Yeah, it doesn't contribute towards level gains, but
right.
It is something we can track.
Yes, thank you. And in fact, several programs are doing that and are finding that really helpful. And I know the ABLE test in particular is gaining in popularity. So those are in your chat. You've got the best practices document. And then our final slide. Oh, look at us right on time. Just asking if you have any questions for me or Rebecca. I am more on like teaching at this end, and Rebecca knows all the things about all the intake and testing, as well as extensive time in the classroom too. So let us know if there are other questions or things you'd like to talk about. But if not, I believe this is the last session. Is that right, Christine? So I think you're ready to start Friday.
Yes, it is the last session.
You made it. And I happened to wander outside during the break, and it is delightful, at least in St. Paul. So I hope everyone gets outside. But we will stick around for a few minutes if people have further questions.
Yep. Thanks so much for coming.